Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight at the beautiful Pollock Theater for this special preview screening of The Last Picture Shows. My name's Rich Farrell, and I'm a graduate student in the Film and Media Studies department here at UCSB, and a graduate student researcher with the Carsey-Wolf Center. And we're joined by Seattle-based filmmaker Rustin Thompson and Ross Melnick, who is a faculty member of Film and Media Studies and also the interim director of the Carsey-Wolf Center and is in the film tonight. So
I snuck in.
How'd you get in there?
This guy asked.
Yeah.
Before we hop into the film itself, I thought we could maybe start out on a kind of sweeter note and ask if you both would like to share a notable memory of going to the movies.
I could do that. I think one of the best things that ever happened to my movie-going education was my parents getting divorced in 1967, because then they had to figure out what to do with me on weekends. I was 9 years old, and my mom took me to movies on Saturday, and my dad took me to movies on Sunday. And it was these early spaghetti westerns from Sergio Leone that I first realized that there was a presence behind the camera. There was all the cool music and all the great cinematography and just the plots of those crazy plots of those films. And I realized like somebody was behind this. And it really I think sparked my interest in film that has lasted to this day. So I owe it all to Sergio.
I was 7. Around the same age. I was 7. We were visiting New York City. I was living in South Carolina at the time, and we went to see Gandhi at the Ziegfeld Theater. Gandhi's not usually a film. It's about 3.5 hours long. It was an intermission. Not many 7-year-olds were there. I remember thinking, I didn't understand the film. I don't think I understood the experience, but I got a sense that there was something happening. People were dressed up. I still can remember the intermission, the lines, the whole sense of the evening. I think it just made a huge impression on a kid who had mostly spent time going to shopping center theaters.
And it probably made you appreciate salt more.
Yeah, made me appreciate it.
Yeah.
Many great.
If you've seen the film, you know what that reference is about.
Thank you, guys. Rustin, so you've now made several documentaries on a variety of subjects. How did this latest project begin and develop? What drew you to wanting to make a film about the decline of movie theaters in the American West? And what did you learn about these theaters and this region of the country during this journey?
Coming from Seattle, we've had a real decline in the number of movie theaters in our city, unfortunately. We used to be a city where films were premiered the same week they were premiered in New York and LA. That ended about 10 or 15 years ago, and gradually a lot of our great theaters went away. So there was a real sadness about seeing that happen, and I had this thought about making a film about what was going on in all of these small towns that I had not driven through every single one of these small towns before, but the ones that I had gone through, and you would see the movie theater that was dead and gone, and it just seemed so sad to me. So I had this thought about going to as many of these towns as I could and filming these theaters. And my original idea was I was just going to do like a visual essay. I was just going to shoot the cinemas and have the natural sound and maybe a little music and maybe a little text on screen, no interviews, nothing. And it wasn't until the very first theater that I stopped at. My wife was with me. She's in the audience over there, Anne. And it was in Burns, Oregon, and it was tiny. And I had no intention of really talking to anybody. I don't know what my weird idea was, but I thought, oh, this is going to be so cool and esoteric and nerdy. I won't talk to anybody. And Tiny was there working. As you see, like so many of these people actually work in the theaters that they're managing and owning. And he came into work because he knew I was hanging around and he wanted to be on camera. So I put him on camera and he was great. And I thought, okay, my whole concept has changed. I'm still gonna go and shoot all these theaters and just kind of, watch them for a while, but I'm gonna talk to the people who are keeping these theaters alive as well. So that's how it came about.
Great.
Yeah.
So as we've just seen, The Last Picture Shows serves as an archive of these beautiful theaters, landscapes, and communities in this region, as well as a call for preserving the movie-going experience more broadly. But it also teaches us about the history of the film industry and the various crises that movie theaters have faced since cinema's beginnings. Ross, as a historian of film exhibition, how did you come to meet Rustin and get involved in the film to tell this history?
Rustin was kind enough to invite me to be on camera. I was in the middle of a bit of a health craziness, so I think we dodged each other for a while.
We did. Yes.
Yeah, but eventually we sat down. I still remember the day that you came for the interview. You were ill. I think I was recovering from an illness, so we were both sort of like. But it was interesting, you know. I remember the interview well because we got into it. We really talked for a long time about what was really going on, and partly what was exciting about what you were doing was not that you were. Yes, you were documenting all this, so I hadn't seen any of this footage.
Right.
But the questions we were talking about is what's really going on. And I remember our conversation, you kept saying, I'm talking to all these exhibitors and they keep telling me they want to do this, they want to do that, why can't they? And that was part of the probing questions that you see that in the film, that you're trying to figure out. It's not just that the audiences are dwindling, it's that the structure of what they're trying to do is being blocked. And that's one of the conversations that we had that day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just want to add, I want to shout out my executive producer, Rachel, who's here, who funded this entire movie. And Rachel was the one who actually put me on to Ross because you had him as an instructor at UCLA?
No, I just knew about Cinema Treasures.
Yes. So Rachel knew about cinematreasures.org, which if you haven't gone to that site, you have to go to it. And without that website, I never would have been able to make this film. And I didn't even know it existed until Rachel told me about Ross. And then I looked him up and I looked up Cinema Treasures site, and literally any town in the world you can plug in, and if it has had a movie theater or still has one, it'll show up, even if it's in India somewhere. That was my map through all of these towns. So that's how I decided where to go, because I don't think I would have stumbled into a place like Pioche, Nevada, or Goldfield, Nevada, or Toccoa, Washington, without cinematreasures.org. So Ross was the key to not only that, you and your co-founders for the website, but the key to my being able to make the film, but the invaluable historical lesson as well. I just needed one person who really knew his stuff to bring it all together for me.
What's interesting about this moment is I'm just thinking while you're talking, it was literally exactly 25 years ago in December 2000 that website was founded. It launched in December 2000 with the idea that because I lived in small towns, I didn't know where all the other theaters were in small towns, and the idea back then, drifting on a book called Great American Movie Theaters by David Naylor, the book was out of date, a lot of those theaters had closed, and I thought, this is before Wikipedia, what if we created a website where people could share where they lived? It was before crowdsourcing was a thing. Yeah. And that's what happens. We launched in December 2000, so to sit here 25 years later, knowing it's done some good, is really heartening. Yeah, and the photos on there were really helpful too. The ones that were good quality, I just repurposed for the film, and they were all in public domain, most of them. So it was very easy to use them.
Yeah, and you mentioned in the car on the way over here that you wanted to keep the talking head interviews of expertise kind of limited to like a singular voice. Yeah. Right. Instead of broadening it out. Yeah, I don't like films with a lot of experts. I think one's enough. If you need one, I think one will do it. Yeah. And also I wanted to make the film where the theaters were the main characters and all of the other people were the supporting characters. And that's why I just wanted to really sit on some of these theaters and have us just think about them for a while and think what went on there, the sounds around us, and imagine what it meant for the people that were there. And if it's still open, what does it mean now? If it's closed, what did it mean for the people who passed by it and remember that time? Great. So Rustin, you're the author of Get Close, Lean Team Documentary Filmmaking from Oxford University Press, I believe. Yeah. Which serves as a guide for documentary filmmakers to make their films more independently and affordably. I'm curious, how did your filmmaking career develop, and how did you develop this notion of lean team documentary filmmaking? And was this style employed for the Last Picture shows? Yes and yes. Okay, so I got to go back a little ways. I first started in local TV
in some small towns and also in Seattle. And then I worked for network television as a freelance cameraman for CBS News, mainly on a show called 48 Hours. I'm really showing my age. If you remember that, you're probably as old as I am. And the show was designed to work in a really small two-person team. You had a camera person and you had a sound person. And you had to get really close to your subjects, and you didn't use a tripod, and you tried not to use lights, and you had a wide-angle lens, so you could get even closer and film more stuff in the shot. So I really learned how to work that way, just work mostly by myself or with one other person, and I also got very comfortable with just coming up to people and starting to talk to them. And things really kind of shifted in the late 90s, early 2000s, where the digital tools came out, it's like what you guys are using here to film this. I can now work that way with a much lighter camera. And so I really adopted that method, and it became very popular among documentary filmmakers. It democratized the industry, and it became this kind of golden age where nearly anyone could make a film if they could just buy a camera, and you could also get Final Cut Pro to edit at home. A lot of bad movies were made then, but a lot of good ones too. And then, of course, the industry got involved, and all of these films you could make for very low budget because you didn't have much of a crew and you didn't have expensive tools. Suddenly, everything started to get more expensive, and the budgets went from, well, I made my first documentary on the WTO for like $2,500, and suddenly budgets were going up into the $500,000, $1 million range. And it really, and that's happened in the last 15 years, and we got away from this idea of lean team documentary filmmaking. So that's why I wrote the book. I just wanted to go back to this idea of just you and a camera and your subject matter, and you eliminate all of the barriers to getting good interviews from people. That means you eliminate the lights, you eliminate the boom mic, you eliminate the external monitor, the external sound drive, and it's really a way of going back to the roots of working. So on this film, I did use a tripod, and I did use a little slider, which is kind of like a little mini dolly thing that you can hook up to your camera. But everything else I did by myself. And I did all the sound off the onboard camera mic, which everybody will tell you don't do that, but I did. And now with filtering systems, you can filter out all the extraneous noise and you can still get a good audio signal, but you have to get close to people. And the interesting thing about the title of my book, Get Close, is that I wrote it and released it in 2019, and shortly after that, the pandemic happened, and nobody was getting close to anybody. So the title is a bit of a joke now, and all the film programs shut down for like 2 years. Yeah.
Did it translate to you doing any like workshops teaching this method?
Very, very few.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. We already talked about Cinema Treasures a little bit, Ross, but I'm wondering if maybe you can extend that conversation a little bit and tell us a little bit about how your career helping to preserve, archive, teach, and study film exhibition came about.
Something of an accident. I was working at a bunch of tech companies, and that's how I met Patrick Crowley, who was then the CTO of a company called Shortbuzz, which was actually a short film website, kind of a festival. This is New York in the late 1990s. And that was the impetus to start thinking about movie theaters, and I started working on the site, and I realized I think I am enjoying working on this site more than I'm working for these tech companies. So I thought, well, I'll go get a master's degree, and that'll be it. And then you get the bug, you get the fever, the archive fever. And so that just led to working on articles and books, and getting this glorious job at UC Santa Barbara and being here. So yeah, it's been about almost a quarter century now of doing that. But along the way, I've worked with a number of theaters when they're working on their histories, anniversaries, reopenings. Because I remember working for Lowe's Cineplex. This is almost 20 years ago. Actually, it's 21 years ago. They were celebrating their 100th anniversary. It's hard to believe. And they'd filed for bankruptcy. They'd been bought and sold so many times that they had no idea what their history was. So they brought me in to say, who are we? And I just wanted to resurrect Marcus Lowe because it was the name of the company. And Marcus Lowe kind of became the the mascot of their anniversary. So it's certainly sort of about finding I think you document that really beautifully in the theater. It's about finding your soul. You know, every theater has this story, this history, this essence. Last year here with the Granada Theater celebrating the 100th anniversary, it was about Charles Urton and the building and the transition over time and the changing nature of Santa Barbara. You know, these theaters are just, you all know this, but they're not buildings. They are, but they're these places that hold all these memories and all these transitions and all these eras and epochs, and they're personal, they're communal, they're public, and they're transitional. They're just a very different place. Even the Pollock goes through all the people who've been here, who've been staff that's here, directors have come before, all the programs, all the guests. There's so many memories of people who've come here and worked here, and that's just a different kind of place than a bank. And I think that's why there are buildings and there are theaters, and they're really, in my mind, they're really, really different edifices.
And this isn't the first film that you've worked on before either. You did one about the Lamley theaters in Los Angeles, right?
Yeah, other people make the mistake of asking me questions about movie theaters besides Rustin. No, it's an honor when you can hopefully share a little bit of what you've learned to help fill out a story. But there are a lot of filmmakers. I think there's a little bit of I don't want to say a groundswell, but there's a little bit of energy going on. April Wright's another, Raphael Sbarge with Only in Theaters. Rustin's beautiful film. I think there's something going on because I think people are understanding something is sliding away. It's not just movie theaters. It's something about the way we connect with each other. Bowling Alone being one of those books that the people talk about, and moviegoing. And I think it's natural for people whose lives were so influenced by movies and going to the movies, as filmmakers now looking at this and saying, I'm going to bring this to people. And I think Rustin's film is just a beautiful example of what I've seen over the last really 5 years, especially since the pandemic.
Yeah.
I'll just add, I was actually quite surprised when I would go into these towns. Some of these places, I would literally just show up outside, and the manager would happen to come by at the same time, or the owner, and would say, hey, well, you want to come inside? And I was always impressed by how not only did they have a history with the town, but that they were committed to these places. I mean, like the guy in Gallup said, sometimes we only have 2 people here, but I want them to have a great experience. I mean, it's really kind of remarkable, and I don't think any of those theaters would exist without people who really feel like they were on a mission to give the people of their community something.
Yeah. So my next question is about documentary form. You open your book, Get Close, by noting how seeing Errol Morris's classic, The Thin Blue Line, for the first time was a very formative experience for you in terms of learning about how documentaries can be made in different ways from the conventional modes that we often see. In Ross's presentation of tonight's event a few weeks ago at the film exhibition panel, he praised this film's ability to primarily show rather than tell this story about these theaters and these communities. How did you decide on the form and style that we encounter in the last picture shows?
Well, I'll start off by saying I don't think it's particularly unique what I did, but I tried to use. There's so many different tools that you can use in making a film of cinema. It's part of the whole language and grammar, and I think there are too many films, documentaries especially, err on the side of not really exploring all of those tools. And I really wanted to get as much as I could into this film of everything I've learned through the last 30-some years. And I also wanted it to move more slowly, because I think documentaries especially move too quickly. And I wanted to use sound, natural sound. I wanted to use silence. I wanted to, if I was going to use music, I wanted it to be like a character in the film. I wanted the lyrics of the songs to mean something. And then I didn't want to narrate it, but I also wanted my voice to be there, because I think it's important to know that there's a filmmaker involved in making the film. But I also had to tie things together. So then I resorted to the text on screen and tried to really minimize that. I could have included a lot more. I thought about it, including populations of these towns, or what happened to some of these towns to sort of crater their economies. But I had to be judicious about that because I didn't want to fill it up with too many words. So I just really wanted to just take all of these tools and see how I could blend them and sort of, dissolve between them, transition, and just, I figured most of the time when I start out making a film, I figure no one's going to see it. So I just, it just gives you a lot of freedom.
Yeah, this is sort of like an accompanying question. Well, you sort of already gestured towards it in terms of talking about wanting the music to, function as like a character in itself. You're a DJ for Road Songs and Night Train, two programs on Seattle's KBCS 91.3 FM, which is a mostly volunteer-powered public radio station at Bellevue College. I really love the soundtrack of this film. I'm wondering if you could maybe speak a little bit more about this, and also you gestured earlier towards some of the decline of cinema going within Seattle as well, so I don't know if you wanted to expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah, I can talk about the music first. So yeah, I have a show called Road Songs. That's the one that it's alt country and Americana and American roots music. I've been doing about 25 years. What I love about that music is that the lyrics and the writing, the lyrics, the message, the sort of mournful tone of those songs have always affected me. And I really have always wanted to make a movie where I could use that kind of music. So when I decided to make this film, that was my soundtrack on the road trips. And I would literally, make notes of these songs, like, I'm going to put that in the film. I'm going to put that in the film. And it just, I think it's the only music you can really have for a film like this, because it's all about, it just evokes the West. And what was the other question? What was the other part?
Just expanding on like the landscape.
Oh, the landscape, yeah.
Yeah, cinema going in Seattle.
Right, but I was going to say something about the music. So for all of you out there who are thinking about making a documentary, you hear this before about getting rights to music. Whatever you do, just go for the most independent voice you can find. Somebody who owns owns the publishing rights, owns the recording rights, and talk to them directly to get them to give you music for the film. Because I had to cut some music out of this because I had to deal with record companies and it was going to be too expensive and take too long. So that is essential if you can pull that off. And so the movie theater thing, Seattle. I went to UW. At University of Washington from 76 to 81. That was like a golden time. Not only was it the movies of the 70s, but we had literally like 8 or 9 theaters within 2 miles. And they were all beautiful art house, single screen theaters. Most were single screen. And they have, one by one, nearly all of them disappeared. One has been turned into a music venue. And another one is such bad shape, no one goes there. All these theaters disappeared. We had the Landmark chain that owned a lot of these, and they've disappeared. There's only one Landmark theater left now, and it's been kind of devastating. However, there was a small theater that just opened about 6 years ago. It's very near my house. That's doing repertory film, and they're not making any money, but they are carrying the flag. Yeah.
And you mentioned you do sort of like a series on films from the 70s too?
Yeah, I have a Cinema of the 70s series at this theater where I have a mailing list and people come.
That's awesome.
So,
yeah.
Just showed Dog Day Afternoon last week.
Ross, your opening interview, you address this kind of idea of cinema deserts. I was wondering if you could maybe expand on that a little bit.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's built on the food deserts nomenclature, of course, but it's a really devastating reality, which is that for many people, I think Santa Barbara actually punches way above its weight class in terms of theaters. I mean, not just because of the Pollock, but because everything at Riviera, everything at Spiff, the Arlington, all the metropolitan theaters. It's kind of amazing, especially when the drive-in was still here. So for a town of this size, the venues are incredible. But a lot of places aren't like that. A lot of places, like the town I grew up in. But a lot of places, there's not a movie theater for 50 to 100 miles. And the ramifications of that are not just that the people who live there don't have access to theaters. It means that if you have a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old, they're not going to go to the movies. And if you don't have someone going to the movies at 5 or 10, they're not going to go when they're 20 or 30. So every cinema desert means that you're losing generations of moviegoers. That may not be a problem for a studio or a streaming company who's not worried about that, but certainly for an exhibition business that sort of wants to have a next generation, if you have 50 to 100 miles of no movie theaters, and remember that not everybody has cars. We tend to think that everyone has easy access to transportation. They don't. So cinema deserts are actually a huge problem, and every time a theater closes, it just makes the desert wider. And then that means that, again, less people going. The generational implications of that mean that there is a growing epidemic of movie theaters not being open. There are people working on the same problem across India. You mentioned India. The single-screen theaters across India are closing. And so this is actually a global problem. Rustin's done a beautiful job of documenting what we will one day, hopefully not, but one day may unfortunately see as the last theaters where the desert has now grown in, if you will. Whereas around the world, this is becoming a huge problem. And so it means that there are now generations of people for whom movies and entertainment are either driven by their television, their phone, or their laptop. And I guess the thing to add to that, of course, is that, talking about connectivity and community. That means that their connection to media is one-on-one or two people. It's not that the media means an experience of going out.
Yeah.
And I'll just add too that this is another element I didn't really cover in the film because it would have been a whole nother story, is the economies of these towns have been hollowed out for various reasons. And Susanville, where the Sierra Theater is a good example. That used to be a prison town. They had 2 prisons there, which employed a lot of people, brought people into the town, and they both closed. And the owners, Mike and Carolyn, pointed to that as one of the reasons they were losing people in the theater. Last I heard, that they did close it. They haven't been able to sell it yet. The nonprofit that was supposed to come in, the Symphony, hasn't followed up yet. So the theater is just kind of sitting there, and occasionally they'll rent it out for special events or something like that. But yeah, that was sad.
It's also worth noting, sitting there is not a benign situation for an old theater, because inevitably, if you own a home, roofs degrade, and you get a little bit of a water leak someplace, it's into the plaster.
Yeah.
Then you have some moisture. Now you're talking about mold, mildew. You're talking about break-ins, vandalism. The longer a theater sits, the more likely it is the renovation costs and the reopening costs are going to be exponential, not just because you have new connection fees with the utility company. So it means that the longer it sits, the more likely it gets more expensive, which means all the estimates of what it would have taken to buy it, suddenly they get an inspector in there and they go, oh, you have this problem you didn't know about. We found asbestos, we found a leak, we found mold. So then you have a problem. People go, well, you know what? I'm walking away.
Yeah.
So the longer it sits, actually, it's a very, very problematic situation.
And it's something else I didn't explore, but maybe you can amplify this, that a lot of these theaters, they're sitting in these towns, and they can't do anything with the building anyway because of the slanted floor, right? They have the classic slanted floor, and that's like a huge renovation cost.
There are all these weird things where but the hardest theater to reopen actually is a multiplex, because if you ever went to the Mann National in Westwood, it was this beautiful, amazing late '60s massive single screen. It had no stage, no fly tower, no dressing rooms. So it was, what are you going to do with a massive space?
Yeah.
And so they tore it down. So there are different problems for different theaters. So when you have, if you have a sloped floor, which means how are you going to do anything else with it? So in some cases they'll obviously delete it, and then they'll turn it into a drugstore or a warehouse. There are all kinds of weird reuses. There's a really great book called Movie Theaters. It was done by Yves Marchand and Romain Meffre, 2 French photographers, came out a few years ago from Prestel Publishing, and you can see all of these rather insane reuses of theaters, from supermarkets to warehouses to very strange studios. But it's a very problematic space. These are not easy spaces, but it also means that they're very susceptible to unfriendly takeover. And when I say unfriendly, I say once you either take it over as a store or sometimes as a house of worship, they don't want people back in there. Like it'll never get it back to a movie theater because either the alteration or the new owner or lessee it'll essentially never return.
So when I was in undergrad, I took a coming of age in American cinema course, and we screened Peter Bogdanovich's 1971 classic, The Last Picture Show, which your film draws its title from and even references multiple times throughout. There's actually a number of film references that you provide. How does your film, The Last Picture Shows, recall some of these themes found in Bogdanovich's film? And how do both of your films perhaps address this idea of coming of age at different time periods in America?
Yeah, the coming of age thing is difficult because, as we've been talking about, just getting people who are still coming of age into a movie theater, there's not that many anymore. I think I was trying to capture a little bit, not as well as he did with his film, but a little bit of the sort of mournful feeling of these spaces and these streets that these theaters sat on, and just this quality of loss and moving on. That film holds up really well. It's an American masterpiece. And it really, when the theater owner dies in that film and the theater is shuttered, everybody just kind of drifts away. And if they don't drift away in the film, you know that after the film they're going to drift away. Their lives are just going to fritter out. And it was really kind of a metaphor for the dying of small town America.
Yeah. Ross, a few weeks ago, you already mentioned this in your introductory remarks. You moderated a really great panel discussion called Moviegoing and Film Exhibition in Flux with filmmakers Brad Silberling and Jason Reitman, Maggie McKay from Vidiots, and Jackie Brenneman from Attend, which is a new distribution platform that they're experimenting with. How does The Last Picture Shows add to that conversation about current issues facing moviegoing? And if you want, perhaps add some additional notes about what's going on in LA if you want. Yeah.
I think the thing to look at right now is that there's a big problem going on in terms of how to move forward. There was a difference between what the studios want to do, what theaters want to do. Sometimes they're in sync and sometimes they're not. I think when you're thinking about Los Angeles, the big conversation going on in LA at the current moment is around the Cinerama Dome. People are waiting to see if the dome will reopen, under whom. I think there's also a conversation we heard a few weeks ago about the Village Directors Circle, which Jason Reitman and Brad Silberling are going to reopen along with 33 other directors. It's an interesting situation. I think it's really interesting to think about Santa Barbara and LA are the direct opposite of the theaters in these towns, which is that LA is, the Arrow, the Egyptian, the Vista, Vidiots. They're just theaters across town that people are still attending. Now, many of them are older moviegoers, I will say, but I think it's a situation where you see a lot of vibrancy to movie, but it's a movie town. The question really is what's happening to places like Seattle, what's happening to places like Boston, places like Dallas, where there is some momentum, and then there's also a lot of challenges. The conversations that have often happened is that the question is what is going to bring certain kind of audiences back. We talked about, I think, a few weeks ago, the concern around older audiences, and I think the concern around younger audiences. I think the middle range, and we represent about 3 different generations up here, I think we're still going to the movies. I think what's happening above us and below us is the concern that I think people are really fighting to deal with.
Yeah. Rustin, you open with this message, the images, words, and music in this picture were all conceived and crafted by human beings. We talked a little bit about this at dinner. What does the rise of AI in the film industry mean for independent filmmakers like yourself?
If it keeps rising, it's going to be the death of our culture and the art form. Several art forms, but film is what I most care about. And there's a sort of blindness going on about it. I'm in a chat group with other documentary filmmakers, And I'm just kind of alarmed at how many of them are just saying, well, it's here, we can't do it, let's figure out how to work with it. And I don't know how, there's different kinds of AI. There's ones that they're a good tool to analyze and streamline some basic tedious tasks. Then there's generative AI, which makes stuff up. And you just have to, I've never tried it, so I may not know exactly how to do it, but you just tell your computer, I have an idea, this is what I want it to look like, and it'll do it for you. And I can't imagine why we would want to do that, because this is an art form, it's craft, and people have to learn this. They spend many years practicing and learning this, just like playing a piano or painting a picture, writing a book. It's the same with film. It's an art form, and to just hand it over to a machine is kind of a violation of the whole idea of it.
Yeah. This was a preview screening, the first time this film has been shown in front of a live audience, which is pretty awesome. On your website, you also note that The Last Picture Shows is in the fine cut stage. I'm curious, what's next for this film? Is there a continuation of editing? Are you going to send it off to film festivals? And then how do you plan to stay in contact with these theaters and communities going forward?
It's only in the fine cut stage in that I think you can still make changes to almost anything now before it's totally locked. But I'm just now starting sending it out to film festivals. And my idea is, because of the way the market for documentaries right now, which is really bad, hardly any docs are being purchased and hardly any docs are getting theatrical releases. So film festivals have become a de facto theatrical release for your film. It used to be, they would tell you, don't go to any small film festivals, only go to big ones. Well, I'm doing that completely differently. I'm sending it to every small town film festival I can find, and hopefully they'll screen my film, and that way a lot of people will see it, which is really all I want for this movie.
Yeah.
So I'm doing that. And sorry, I forgot the last part of your question.
Yeah, curious as to how you plan to stay in contact with the theaters and communities that you encountered.
I have everybody's email. I have most of their phone numbers. I'm updating them regularly on the film, and then I want to, at some point, sort of go on a town by town road trip and book their space and show the film in their town.
Great.
So,
yeah. That's awesome. I think we're going to send it off to the audience for a few questions as well.
First, I want to thank you very much as a filmmaker for giving us the great honor to be able to actually do a premiere here with a live audience. It's really a great gift. It's a wonderful film. One of the things that struck me in watching the film was that so many of those theaters were showing major studio releases and having trouble surviving through that, and the studio restrictions that are put on them really hamper their ability to raise money. Is there a way that the move to digital has really resulted in the closing of a lot of theaters, given the cost of the equipment that it takes in order to be able to project the film there? You know, they quoted $100,000 to get the actual projection system in there. And it's interesting to think about it because, you know, at some level, Blu-ray and the ability to use much simpler, less expensive equipment, you could still continue to run a film program and allow you some independence in terms of your programming that could really help some of those theaters. I just want to get your response to that.
Well, having talked to a lot of the people who own and manage these theaters, the ones who converted to digital said it was the best thing they ever did. Because it is much simpler, and they really didn't have a choice if they wanted to stay in business. But they did say they're really glad they made the choice. It's much simpler to deal with a film on a digital drive. Now a lot of theaters have portals where they just download them. I don't think a lot of these do. But it also made it a lot easier for the movie studios, and I think you can talk about this too, Ross. It made it easier for the studios to just blanket these cinemas with whatever they consider the most popular film, and the most popular film is usually the one that's playing at the most cinemas. So it's kind of like it's eating its own tail in a way. And that's why they're stuck with a lot of these movies. But the theaters, the people that I talked to, I would ask them, I said, what about playing more art house films? And that was mentioned in the film a little bit. And they would say, we would love to do that, but if we show like a film that's 20 years old that might appeal to the 35 to 70-year-old crowd, hardly anyone comes. So that's one of the really difficult dilemmas I think these theaters have, is they're stuck with these films that most people will come and watch for a week, but they're not very good movies, as we know. There's always a few that break through. And so they're kind of stuck showing those. They try to be more imaginative, and not enough people come. So they're really trying to balance things. That's why if they have more than one screen, they can experiment more. But it's a really tough dilemma.
I would just say it's really hard to underestimate how much the ecosystem of how we used to watch movies has been effectively destroyed, which is that it used to be you'd open in the newspaper and you would know what was playing that weekend.
Right.
You used to get national TV ads that would tell you what was going to be screening that week. It's much more effective and much cheaper for studios to blanket social media. Well, not everybody's on social media, not everyone's watching TV, and almost no one's reading the newspaper. So the whole way we just knew when things were coming out has changed. And so now it's this very strange game of like trying to create, generating awareness, which Energy and other companies can track and figure out how to get people to come in. But the way that, so something like Zootopia, everyone's trying to figure out how did Zootopia 2 make all this money? And it's the fact that they don't really know effectively. It was a question we talked about 2 weeks ago at the panel. They don't really know anymore exactly how to market these films. And so they're trying all these things because the old system has died. And in that process, to your point, these individual theaters are basically taking whatever they can get from what's drifting into social media, a little bit of TV, radio ads, or wherever else people are finding movies. But it's just really hard to get to market films in a scattered environment like this. We all are so incredibly atomized. I mean, you may remember, some of you even more than me, we had 3 networks. You had a few independent channels. You had 1 or 2 newspapers, and everybody knew what was coming out. Siskel and Ebert was being watched on weekends on syndication. Movie culture was culture, and it was mass culture. And now there are people who like movies and people who don't, and you kind of know what's out, but you also think, well, I could just wait 2 weeks and it'll be on Netflix, or maybe it won't be on Netflix. I think it'll be on some streaming channel, and I might have one of those 3. I can't remember which ones I subscribed to, and I can't remember my password for the ones that I did subscribe to, but it's fine. I'll find it at some point somewhere. And the find it somewhere, someplace is just what creates the confusion, the lack of scarcity. And the last thing I'd say about this is that scarcity used to drive moviegoing, and what I mean by that is there's only 3 showtimes at the theater down the street, and you had to get in to see it. There's very little scarcity anymore. The seats will be there. The need to go opening weekend factor has disappeared. So the urgency isn't there. And if urgency is not there, then heat is not there. And we are a weird culture that likes heat. We like, the need to get to factor. There's very little need to anymore because we're all just inundated by media, and we know at some point it'll show up. In a small town, it might be slightly different because there is only 1 theater, but it sounds like none of these theaters ever have a sellout. So it's just the whole way that I think I remember how people used to go to the movies. This is a little far from your point, but it is just that the sense of what this is and the urgency and the excitement is down. And so that also changes it. But to your question, these contracts are very complicated for them to deal with. And the expense of conversion did close some theaters. The ones that you could see where they were like, I'm teetering on the edge. There's $100,000. I won't bore you with the whole virtual print fee thing, but there used to be a way through a series of loans that large theaters could get what was called a virtual print fee, and it was a kind of a loan that would pay for all this. Those loans were usually given out to large chains. They weren't given out to small theaters. Now that sounds really backwards the way it should be. because you can imagine who needs those loans, but you also can imagine who you'd want to loan to. So there was a moment where if you couldn't afford the $40,000 to $100,000, theaters just shut down and said, that's it. And so some did.
Tiny in Burns, he was going to shut down when they had to convert to digital. But a kid in town, a high school kid in town, started a Kickstarter, and they raised the money for the projector through the Kickstarter. So it took a village.
I really enjoyed the film. Thanks so much for bringing it. These independent movies seem like sort of lone cowboys out in the West. And I'm wondering if there's a statistic of whether the major distributors need these independent single owner cinemas, or would they just rather they didn't exist so they didn't have to deal with them? Is there a market share of independent sole owner versus, major owner like Regal, for example?
I mean, I don't have a percentages like top of my head, but I think you can imagine that there are more screens for the larger chains have. I mean, there's a difference between theaters and screen count. So the screen count, of course, because if you have a megaplex with 15, 16, 20 screens, you have a lot of screen count. I think your question gets at something quite interesting, which is it easier for them just to die than for them to have to deal with them? On one end, because things are rather centralized, I suppose it's not that hard. You're just sending out DCPs, and there's people who handle that. On the other hand, every single person requires accounting for getting the box office in. There is an administrative function to all of this to figure out who's paid and what they have to pay. It's a really hard thing to say out loud in a way, whether they care, because I'm not sure.
Well, you can look at it a little bit like how Amazon does, it's streaming, pay $3.99 for a film, but they're collecting a lot from every little individual person. And so I think the studios, they look at these theaters and I was in the West, there are a lot more in the East. It's just more, there's more population, there's more of these theaters that exist. I think if you add them all up, and even though they're all just little dribs and drabs, I think it's hard to kiss that money goodbye. So it doesn't cost the studios much at all to ship these things.
The other thing to remember that domestic distribution and exhibition is largely loss leader for the studios. They don't necessarily make much money from the domestic. But if you remember that the domestic distribution and first run exhibition is an advertisement for the next rung of all the ladders. It kicks off the different contracts. Used to kick off, the pay-per-view, the VOD, the SVOD, the international, the cable rights, the network rights. So this used to be a window. I think now what happens in a way, I'll just take Shazam 2 as an example. It seems to be everywhere. Film. Yeah, it seems to be everywhere, Shazam 2. Shazam 2 got all this advertising. So what you're building is a brand event. So most of these, if you think about the $50 to $100 to $200 million it can cost to market a film, the release of a film is a kind of a giant brand launch event. So it's the way you might release a brand new soft drink or a brand new car. And so you're getting on all those marquees and you're getting all this TV is that you're building a brand, and the brand has a release, and it means that now it's into the ecosystem. And like I said, with people who may or not watch it in theaters, they know, well, it's out there now. So if I want to go find it on Disney Plus, Amazon, the brand release is out there. So in a way, what they're getting out of all these marquees is that Shazam 2 has announced itself, and hopefully you'll see it here, but if you want to wait and see it on streaming, we're okay with that too. So everybody's in kind of a different business, and I think that's the big difference from the way it used to be. The film business, in a way, used to be a business, and now there's the film business and the film exhibition business, and they are increasingly at odds with one another in terms of how they think about where it should be seen and what it means.
You mentioned briefly about the 250 nonprofit small theaters. We just recently had a wonderful experience in a small town in Wisconsin at a nonprofit theater run by retirees, essentially. in the community, 10 people there, 3 people film buffs could answer any question you had about upcoming films or the film that was showing. 3 people making homemade popcorn, hot chocolate, that kind of stuff. And it just seemed like it kept the community together and alive, and everybody was so excited about this little theater. I would like to see more of that. I mean, there's 250. Do you think, what is the push for having commercial theaters when communities could do that?
Well, I think, you have to have communities who have a buy-in. They see the value of having the theater. And I think you have to get, a group of like-minded people to take that on. And I think they have a real sense of faith in their town and the longevity of their town. The town offers more than just a movie theater, and they want it to complement that. And in a lot of the places, I didn't have that many in here, but the one in Dayton, Washington, where the woman who worked there who said that she liked Dirty Dancing and Grease, that was a nonprofit too. And they were going to go under several years ago until the city leaders stepped up, and now they had a good vision too. They said, we're not just going to do movies. We're going to do plays. We're going to do live theater. We're going to have graduation events for local high school kids. And so you have to have the vision. You have to have everybody who gets involved be committed to it. And I think it's a good model, and it's potentially a future model, but it won't happen everywhere.
I would add to that just what you were saying, which is that I'm not going to say it's not possible, but it's often not possible to run these theaters as for-profit businesses. The majority these days, when people reopen a theater as an art house, or certainly as a rep house, they'll do so under a 501c3 not-profit organization. It's obviously we used to have a bit more of granting opportunities in this country, but that's private, public funding of these theaters. Donations, grants, that's where the money is. Ticket sales are just not going to do it for almost any theater, even the concessions. So smaller theaters often, and the Art House Convergence, which is a national organization of art house theaters, has really championed this kind of mission-driven, community-based, nonprofit organization. So there's a whole other area. So the independent theater world is kind of split between the nonprofit and the still hopefully profitable, and I think it's sliding more and more towards the nonprofit, in part because what you're talking about, which is the whole nature of that if the community buys into it, it's not just about whether or not it sells enough tickets. It's about does it make itself purposeful for everybody in the community, and so a lot of them, like the Bryn Mawr film theater in Pennsylvania, they do educational programming, they do community programming, they have adult education, they have filmmaking classes, and they have movie going. So they're thinking about the theater as a flexible space that hits all of the constituencies within the area, but does so with a different kind of model.
But the one thing that you haven't talked about is the cost of all of this to the public. Movies have become terribly expensive. And I mean, even a senior discount on it, the Tuesday afternoon is $9.50. And if you then expect, let's take our town, that you go then to a restaurant on State Street afterwards and all that, I mean, you've got over $100 for 2 people or more. Now, Santa Barbara, yes, we've got all this stuff because we have a lot of wealthy people. But when you leave, and I was fortunate enough to, in my last 15 years of my life, to travel all over the United States. So I've been to a lot of the places you showed, and my hat's off to you for the photography. It brought back a lot of memories. There are beautiful, wonderful places out there, but I'm just wondering how in a more and more financially polarized society of haves and have-nots, I mean, you don't fly commercial, do you? And people who are buying 89-inch, not plasma, but 89-inch OLED TVs.
I still have a plasma screen.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
OLED TVs and stuff like that on one hand, and then on the other hand, looking at the cost of going to the movies for the evening.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are not going to movies, not because they don't want to support movies.
Right.
And then along comes Wicked or Wicked Forever or whatever they're calling it now. And
Wicked ad nauseum.
Yeah, wicked ad nauseum. I mean, those things are being pushed, and everything's being shot on IMAX now.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny. Recently they showed something from Led Zeppelin, and they showed it in IMAX here. It was shot in 16 millimeter. It looked horrible, but it's in IMAX, right?
Yeah, right.
So then people go there, and then they have restaurants and recliners and lazy boys, and you can fall asleep after you pay your $50. So where do we go, right?
Right. So I would just say I haven't run the numbers on this lately, but the last time I checked on movie prices, not everything that comes with the movie prices, transportation, parking, restaurants, everything, babysitting, but movie prices themselves have not advanced that high compared to other types of entertainment like concerts or restaurants or theatrical plays. You can still, over the last 20 some years, it hasn't really gone up that much. So that part of it I don't think is the problem. And you can still get good deals if, some theaters have cheap Tuesdays or whatever. Yes, it's more than streaming. And yes, if you make a whole night of it, it's going to cost you more. But I think that's another thing about the movies is you want to make it an event. You want to make it something special. You're getting out of your house, and it is going to cost you more. But that's why you want to go see something good, something you can talk about afterwards, not something that just grazes past your brain and you forget it as soon as you walk out of the theater. So I think if you look at it more as an investment in your own sort of cultural health, then I think it's worth it.
There are people doing that.
Yeah.
The other piece of it is that we're in a weird place where increasingly because people have 80 to 100-inch televisions or they're watching film through VR glasses, they can have a large-scale immersive experience with incredible technology for little, right? So that's why all the money's been pushed into premium large format like IMAX and dine-in, et cetera. So then you're chasing your tail, which is that nobody wants to go unless it's better than their home, right? But then that's $25 to $30. So which is it? So that's why you have a stratification of ticket prices and a stratification of venue. I would say that it's 100% true that most venues for entertainment are unaffordable for people on limited means. Movies are actually, as you said, they are the most, by percentage, affordable. But if you're not able to spend $100 to $150 for a family of four, you might have a tough time going to the movies. And that sounds insane if you think about the fact that these were, 25 cents. And I remember going to $2.50 shows when I was a kid. So we're at $25, and then you're doing 4 times, and then babysitter, as you were saying. We are at a place. And so there was a reason why we're here. No one's invested in that conversation because if you lower that, you get less percentages, and that triggers all the problems with those other contracts I mentioned. So we are at a place where, just like everything else in America, inflation, income stratification, inequity has an impact. But these towns are not charging $25, but if you are in a town that's collapsed economically, it doesn't quite matter. So I guess it's just we're at the same place we are with everything in the United States and globally, which is that we're at a place where the money is a problem.
A funny little story. When I first learned what inflation was, I think I was about 10 years old, 11 years old. And this is one of the movies I went to with my mom, How the West Was Won. Big bloated Western, but a blockbuster film of its time. And went to the Tacoma Mall Theater. And movies then were about $1.50 or something like that. And we go to the theater, and the price had been raised to $2.50. And we'd been looking forward to this movie like all week. And my mom turns to me and she said, "This is the last one." I said, what do you mean? This is the last movie we'll ever go to. We can't keep paying this kind of money. And she wasn't serious, but she drove it home to me. It's like, $2.50, really? And that's it? But it was a lot then. It was a steep hit. Yeah.
The truth is we go to the movies between, those who go between 4 and 6 times a year. That's the average. So it's about 5. So if you are spending $20, you're spending $100 a year, you personally, whoever that person who goes 5 times a year is spending $100. It's a lot of money, but we all know what we all waste our money on. So the issue is that it is expensive. I will totally agree with you. On the other hand, we're blowing money on a lot more every day. The question is just, how do you make it affordable for people who can't even spend the $20? And that's the hard conversation. I guess my pitch for that is I marvel at people spending $20 to $30 on Netflix and Disney Plus streaming per month, but won't get a Regal or Alamo Drafthouse subscription for the same amount. I mean, basically, you can go out to the movies every single night for $30. That wasn't available in 1964. Yeah. So if you want to get out of the house, it's the same price as having the thing that's keeping you in the house. So these choices are yours. We are presented with an overabundance of choices today. That's also part of the problem. But I would say that if your desire is to not live inside your phone and your desire is to absorb community and culture, whether it's at AMC or Regal or Alamo or at the Pollock or at Spiff, there are ways to get out and there are ways to take advantage. You're all here. There are ways to do it relatively thrifty. But I don't think that's our main problem why people aren't going. I think we're just in a really, really confused environment. And I think people have made a lot of decisions that are not beneficial to theaters about how movies are distributed and when they show up on streaming. Yeah.
So thank you for making this movie. It was really, really very enjoyable.
Thank you.
My question is, and I'm not sure if you can address this or not, but just as we've seen these movie theaters close and it's sad, I was talking to a friend of mine who does film work, actually runs a camera, and he told me that there's no work in LA, that it's actually what we remembered and what we knew as LA being and Hollywood being one of the film capitals, or whatever you want to say, it's no longer. So I don't know if you care to address that or not.
Well, your wife works in the business.
Pickings are slim. I would say that, the tax incentives are going to help. They're not going to fix. We are in the same. It's like we're back at the same conversation about the money. The money's better if you're shooting out of the country. It's cheaper to shoot somewhere else, and you would like to think that the state would want to keep production here. You'd like to think that the people who live in this state would want to employ the people who work here, but I'm not that naive, are you? Right? I mean, it's about the money. So there are tax incentives to shoot elsewhere. There are production savings, dancing around union contracts. There are a million reasons why things are being shot in Europe, Australia, Canada, Atlanta for a while, New Orleans for a while. I mean, it's just a situation right now where it's all about the money. I mean, what else can you say? I mean, it's just the truth. I mean, obviously, you can make a film, whether it's a tier 1, tier 3 film in LA, and there will be people who work it happily because there's been so little production. But a lot of you're right. I mean, what I think the question you're getting at is there just something off entirely about the film business? And yeah, I mentioned it in the introduction. We're looking at the end of Warner Brothers as we know it in the next few weeks. Whether it will be a film division, a subdivision of another studio, or a streaming company, just ask 20th Century Fox. So we're really at a moment where it's not just that movie theaters are in trouble. Our sense of what this is and was is shifting and changing so fast, including LA as a place where you can live and work if you're in production. It's all shifting. It's all gone really, really fast, and I think it's hard to absorb it.
Seattle had a pretty thriving filmmaking community in the 90s, early 2000s, but then the permitting changed for actually being able to shoot in the city. The police were very kind of hard-edged about that, harder to get permits. And then a lot of the tech businesses came in, and they didn't want to support filmmaking in the town. So tax incentives also went away. And everybody started leaving. All the people who made films started leaving. They moved to LA. Look what's happened there now. They also moved to New York, same issue. And now no one makes a film in Seattle anymore. Well, not no one, very few people. There's very little money up there. And it's hard to find crews now. So that's why every movie you see set in Seattle is shot in Vancouver. Now there is one film that I'll put a plug in for that was shot in Eastern Washington called Train Dreams. I don't know if you've had a chance to see it. It's on Netflix. Beautiful, gorgeous film. It's the kind of film that every filmmaker who has ever lived in Seattle would love to make, but most of them are long gone now. And the filmmaker was not from the state. But so it happened in Seattle in a microcosm as to what's happening in LA.
And that film got a little tiny theatrical release.
Little tiny, yeah.
Theatrical release.
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you. Just before you conclude, Rich, I just want to say thank you for making this film.
Well,
it's really beautiful.
Thank you for being in it, and thank you. And thanks to Carsey-Wolf for having me here. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you everybody for closing out the quarter with us. Come see us in winter. We got a lot of really great events coming up. And yeah, thank you again, Rustin and Ross, for such a great event and such a special screening.
Thank you.